Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am the Bagman, Damon Martin.
Oh, and I am Dollface, Patrick Guerra, but of course.
And Patrick, this week we are reviewing the new Strangers, not the old Strangers, not Strangers Pray at Night. No. The Strangers Chapter 1.
The Strangers Chapter 1, released in May of 2024, starring, of course, Madeline Pesh as Maya, Froy Gutierrez as Ryan, with a brief appearance by Richard Brake, of course, everybody's favorite, as Sheriff Rotter, and written by Alan R. Cohen and Alan Friedland, and directed, as you say, Damon, by the great Rennie Harlan. Chapter 1. Damon, you said something in the intro about the Strangers here. They're saying this is a reimagining. They're saying it does not take place in the timeline of the original Brian Bertino film. Is that their official stance?
So, okay, yes, that is the truth. But the reality is that it's really funny. I was watching an interview. I watched a couple interviews with Courtney Solomon, I think it was his name. He was one of the main producers, one of the leading producers on this thing. He was one of the people who championed this project. And I saw him do an interview, and one of the interviewers said, okay, can you clarify for us if this is a remake or it's a prequel or what exactly this is? And Courtney, God love him, he sat there and spoke for about 7 minutes, never giving a direct answer, basically saying, like, this definitely isn't a prequel or a sequel, and it's not exactly a reboot. Here's what we wanted to do. And he just went and, like, talked in circles for 7 minutes without ever truly answering the question. And at the end, like, the interviewer posted the interview and said, I tried to get him to explain. Let's be clear. And I've read a lot of reviews since seeing the film, and I've read a lot of interviews since it. I read them after seeing the movie. This is a reimagining. It's a reboot. That's exactly what it is. Don't let them tell you it's something else. It's a reboot. It's a reimagining. That's what it is. And so, no, it's not in the same timeline as the original Strangers. It's not connected to The Strangers or The Strangers Pray at Night. This is not a prequel. And I think the confusing part about why you don't know that and I don't know that, and apparently the producers don't even want to talk about that, is in the trailer it says, see the origin of the Strangers. So they're basically telling you this is a prequel in a way, but it's not. This is just a total reimagining set in a quote unquote Strangers universe.
Damon, are you one of the producers? Because you also just this is baffling to me, because it's really been hard to pin this down. Now, we talked about the Strangers just a couple of recordings ago in preparation for Strangers Chapter 1, and we did get into this. We did get into the fact that we were going to be telling a different story this time around, but there was, at least at that time, the information I had was that this was part of that universe. It was just a different story in the universe. And now the producer's saying, well, it's a reimagining. Like, what? Like, give us an answer. So what you're saying to me, Damon, is that The Strangers Chapter 1 is a reboot, and I should have gone into it knowing that. But for some reason, they don't want to say that out loud.
I don't know why. And again, I'm sure you can find the interview I'm talking about, because it's out there. It's everywhere. You'll see it. The guy asks him flat out, like, is this a reboot, a prequel? What is it? And he speaks for 7 minutes and never gives an answer. He just talks in circles, and I don't know why. But to be clear, just to settle the debate, this is a reimagining. It is, because this is a trilogy. And the only way I suss this out is my detective. I put on my Batman hat and play detective here. They filmed these movies over 52 days in a row, and they were filming parts of the movies during different parts of the day. Like, they were filming part 1 and then part 3 the next day and part 2 the next day. Like, they were filming this all together. And the whole story takes place over 5 days. That's the whole trilogy. So by the end of, like, doing all the research and everything, I came to realize, like, this has to be a reimagining, because it can't be a prequel. That makes no sense. And they're telling this as a whole story in 3 films, and it's just a reimagining. I don't know a better way to say it. And I don't know why they're so reluctant to just say that. I don't get it.
I think they actually would have done themselves a lot of favors this box office weekend, as of this recording, if they would have just said it was a reboot. Because if you just say it's a reboot, it would have changed how I think a lot of people are the initial like exit polls that are going out there right now with a lot of horror influencers and reviewers. They're not being kind. But also, I think if they'd have known flat out that this was a reboot, and I think, and now that I know this, certain things I want to talk about will definitely go in the spoiler section because there's things where I was like, wait, how does that? And I was reading it in these reviews. People were like, I'm very confused about where this lives in the timeline. This is this is super baffling. This is like it's crazy that I'm understanding this just right now as we're talking. People this is a very formative movie. Now you and I talked, and I had only seen this movie about a year ago, The Strangers, the original Strangers, the Brian Bortino one, but I've known since 2008 that this is one of the most beloved movies of the 2000s, and for very good reason. You can listen to that podcast and hear us break down why. It's a genius movie. It's a really, really good movie. Well, Damon, 2008, you and I were full-blown adults. I mean, in our 20s, but adults nonetheless. For some people, for certain millennials, this was like their formative horror. This was a formative horror movie for them. This was their generation's like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and not by accident. Bertino loves that movie and homages it very well in the 2008 movie. So you're talking about a bunch of millennials who are like, no, you don't understand. I was like 10 years old when I watched The Strangers. It's one of the scariest, best movies I've ever seen in my entire life. And this Strangers Chapter 1 bullshit, what the fuck is this? Like, genuinely, I think a lot of people are like, what is going on here? What is this? And you telling me that about that producer kind of just talking themselves in circles is baffling to me. Because just say it's a reboot then. Like, and save these people a lot of heartache, because what they're trying to do, and I read like 3 or 4 reviews before we got on the podcast tonight, they're all still struggling to understand where it exists in the timeline. So the producers and the studio, which is Lionsgate, I believe, doing a terrible job of explaining. Oh, Blumhouse, actually. Blumhouse is one of the studios as well working on this. Doing a terrible job of explaining that to people. They might have been a little bit more forgiving, because there are things in this movie that are just downright like baffling to me. I'm like, I don't understand why. Now, the writers of this movie, as we mentioned earlier, Alan R. Cohen and Alan Friedland, they've done a ton of stuff, but it's like not stuff that is in this realm. They've done King of the Hill, which they wrote a lot on, which is a very beloved animated series, and the Freak Brothers, which I've never heard of, but they're clearly a writing duo for animated stuff. Cool for them. A lot of that's clearly comedy based. Not saying comedic writers can't write great stuff. You know, Jordan Peele sure as shit can. But these guys were hell bent on making this new Strangers trilogy. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe they should have just made something else and just ripped off the Strangers. Don't you think?
So let me give one little cautionary tale as I say this. So everywhere I've read and everything I could surmise, and again, this is me playing detective, is that it's a reimagining, a reboot. My only like little asterisk I'll put on here just to say, just in case I'm wrong. The only thing I can think of if they are trying to build this into being like a trilogy prequel is that they don't want to say that because the ending is going to lead into like they're going to bring back Scott Speedman and maybe we'll see Liv Tyler's character, like what happened to her at the end of Strangers, and they don't want to give that away because that's going to be in the third film. That's my only guess. That's why they're dancing around it. Maybe that's why that, you know, the end of the third film you're going to see Liv Tyler's character in like a future scene or whatever. You're like, oh my god, this is connected, and that's why they're not saying it, because they're trying to surprise you. So if that happens, go back and listen to this episode. Damon, way to go, buddy. You got it. Outside of that, I don't get it. I don't get, again, you're not remaking, rebooting, whatever the hell they're going to call this. You're not doing this to a film that's 50 years old, 40 years old. You're doing this to a film that came out 16 years ago. Now, in and of itself, that's a difficult task to do, especially when you take a really beloved horror film. I mean, you and I saw the trailer for it tonight. When I saw The Strangers, they showed the trailer for Speak No Evil, a film I know people are probably like, oh, dude, don't start again. But you and I absolutely adored the original film. It's on Shudder. Great film. Is it Swedish or Danish? I always get it mixed up.
It's a Danish film.
Yeah. Danish film. In English, by the way. So it's not like it's, foreign language. You got to read subtitles. It's in English. Brilliant, brutal, one of the greatest endings of a horror film, thriller, whatever you want to call it, of all time. Just shocking. I mean, to this
one of the greats, definitely.
And that movie had barely gotten critically praised before they're like, yeah, we're remaking it in America with James McAvoy. We're like, what the fuck? Like, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, the trailer looks okay, and I am a big James McAvoy fan, so I'm holding out the smallest glimmer of hope that they keep it as somehow even like a sliver as good as the original Speak No Evil. I don't expect it, but I'm hoping beyond hope that it's like at least somewhere in the same universe. So remakes aren't new, and people make them quicker than ever these days. Like, this isn't, I remember when they remade Dawn of the Dead in like 2004. People were like, you're remaking Dawn of the Dead? What a classic. And that came out in the 70s. Like, they're still, like, upset about it. This came out 16 years ago. And to remake it now, okay, like, I just, again, I don't want to keep harping. I don't understand the secrecy. And again, my only guess is they're trying to fool you by the third part in the ending. But other than that, to my knowledge, this is a reimagining. And part of the problem with this film, and this is not spoilers because you can go watch any of the like 2 or 3 trailers out there and know exactly what I'm talking about. There are so many beats that they hit in this movie that will make you say, oh yeah, I saw that done better in 2008. So many of the beats, so many of the story beats, so many of the moments. Now, to be fair, as I mentioned in the intro, the story, quote unquote, is different because unlike our characters in the original ones, they were leaving a wedding. The guy proposed to his girlfriend. She turned him down very awkwardly. They go back to his family home. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere. They're at odds with each other, and then the strange knock at the door happens, and then mayhem kind of follows from there. This couple is driving across country to Oregon, where the girl, Maya, played by Madeline Pesh from Riverdale, is interviewing for a new job. She's an architect, and they're basically moving out west. They're getting ready to move out west. Along the way, they're like, we got hungry. Let's find a place to eat. They go on GPS. They found a little place on a diner, which there's so many issues with like that whole thing. Like,
yeah,
a town that basically feels like it has no Wi-Fi, and they're like, oh yeah, here's this diner that just sits in the middle of nowhere. We're gonna go there to eat. But okay, fine, whatever. They pull off the road to go there to eat in the diner. This is all in the trailer. And while they're there, they end up having to stay in the town. Now, what I'm about to tell you is a very slight spoiler, but it's not, because you can figure this out. Like, why else would they be there? Because we know the story. Their car breaks down. That's how they end up staying in town. Their car breaks down. So they end up staying in town while they're waiting for the car to get fixed. Okay, that's fine. But every other major beat, for the most part, you've seen in the trailer. The scares, the axe, the masked man, the why are you doing this to us? Because you're here versus because you were home. These are all beats that were hit in the 2008 original. So you're kind of like, so this is a remake, right? Because if you're not remaking, if you're going to tell me a year from now when this wraps up, or 9 months from now when part 3 comes out, and you're going to say, see, it was all a prequel. If that's your way you're fooling me here, I'm going to be more pissed off, because this film, while the story is quote unquote different, the beats are almost identical.
I'm going to address that in spoilers, which we might as well get to pretty quick here. So before we do that, I'm going to rattle off my pros and cons. They're very brief, because this is Damon, a stranger's movie. There's only so much you can do. The things I do like about this movie: cinematography, I think, is fantastic. I think it's a very well shot and relatively well directed movie. I mean, we'll get into the nuance of that in a minute. And it's got hardcore 2000s vibe. Like, big time. If you loved 2000s horror, which basically during that time Me and my girlfriend would go to every possible 2000s horror movie in the theater and watch it and enjoy it. Like that's just what I did in my early 20s. Like I'm not going to pretend like I didn't. I'm not going to pretend like I didn't like that era. Is it perfect? No. But this movie like literally just rips you right back into, and I'm talking like pre Strangers. Strangers like 2008. It's almost the tail end of the original 2000s. And that movie stands way out from all the other ones, from The Faculty, from Urban Legend, from I Know What You Did Last Summer. It stands so far ahead and out from all those things. This movie feels like those movies. It feels a little bit like The Faculty. It feels a little bit like I Know What You Did Last Summer. It has those vibes. The characters in this movie, some of the writing, we'll get into that. It just feels like that. So if you are nostalgic for that era of horror, this movie definitely has it. Do you want to list any of your pros, Damon, or are your pros basically the same as mine? Or
A couple things I'll mention. Again, I want to be clear about this. So it sounds like through almost 20 minutes of the podcast, it's just like, wow, these guys really hated this movie or complaining. I'm not actually. I said this like weirdly before we started. I didn't hate this movie. I didn't love this movie. My biggest takeaway before I get to my pros and cons were why. Like this just didn't feel original. And let me explain. Well, let me get to my pros and cons, and I'll come back to that. So pros, I agree. This does look aesthetically like a 2000s movie, and I appreciate that because while the 2000s were a very maligned decade of horror until we kind of got revamped again.
I think you and I dubbed it the Dead Zone.
Yeah, I love 2000s horror. I actually just watched recently one of my favorite 2000 horror films of all time, Joyride, with Paul Walker and Steve Zahn and Lily Sobieski. I freaking loved that movie. I want to review that movie one day on here. It is so good. I absolutely adore that. That's like a top 20 horror film for me. I love that movie. So good. So I love 2000s horror. I really do. I really enjoy it. So this does have a very 2000s aesthetic. The atmosphere that they set with this film feels pretty genuine. Cabin in the middle of nowhere, and they're doing it in Oregon. I've only been to Oregon a couple of times, but it felt Oregon. I know they filmed this in Slovakia, but to their credit, if we had we didn't really complain. Well, we didn't. You brought it up, and I was like, you're right, but it didn't really draw me out of it. But when we saw Evil Dead Rise, and they're trying to tell you that was where they say
they're saying it was Los Angeles, yeah.
It just didn't look, and it didn't look like that at all. It looked more like Detroit or something. But
it was New Zealand.
Yeah, we were kind of like, yeah, this doesn't look like LA. Like you lived there, I've been there many times. I was like, this does not look like LA in any way, shape, or form. But hey, let's move on because most of the movie takes place inside, and so we don't have to really think about it too much. For being in Slovakia, they did a pretty damn good job. Now, granted, it's the woods and it's just an isolated cabin. It's not like they're reinventing the wheel here or anything, but they do a pretty good job in the whole landing in kind of a one-horse town. Again, pretty authentic, doesn't feel that far out of reach. So again, there they did good. And I'll say the mannerisms of the strangers, of our hooded man, of our Cupid doll, and of our doll face. I don't know what they have three.
Yeah, doll face and pinup girl, yeah.
Yeah, pinup girl. All aesthetically look good. They have good mannerisms. They're very creepy. I will say one thing I did actually enjoy about this movie, which I can't get into too much because that would get way into spoilers, and I'll explain more what I mean in that section. These strangers were a little more sadistic, which I kind of appreciate. It was that was like the one little difference between 2008 and this one. And again, I know people are like, stop dancing around and just say the freaking thing. They were a little more sadistic, which did differentiate a little bit from the original. So yeah, those are some pros. There's a couple there. I mean, and again, it's not terrible. It's not a terrible film.
There's a lot of I jumped on TikTok to see what all the content creators were saying, and they were all just taking big giant diarrheas on this movie. I think those are the people that I was talking about earlier that were like, I was 10 years old when I saw The Strangers. It's one of the most important horror films to me. So like, you're fucking with my childhood, which I hate that argument. And Damon, I'm old enough now to have a lot of childhood behind me. Like, I don't get, me, I'm not precious about movies. Like, remake them, do whatever you got to do with them. But a lot of people of a certain age are taking major offense with this movie. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that like they grew up Like it was their Texas Chainsaw, it was their Friday the 13th, it was their Nightmare on Elm Street. So I respect that because I grew up with those movies. But it still doesn't like invoke in me some reason to fucking melt down, which a couple of people are just full on melting down at this. It's okay. This movie's okay. It gets some things really wrong, and we will get into that in a moment. Mainly, my biggest con is that these are fucking stupid characters. Like, stupid characters. And I'm not just saying, like, what they do, it's just how they're drawn. Which is it's not a knock on the actors, it's kind of a knock on the script. So that's probably my biggest problem is the characters in this movie. And then there's the overarching, like, is this a fucking Strangers remake or what? Which we are going to get into, I'm guessing in mere seconds, Damon.
Well, before we do, let me give you my biggest con, because this doesn't spoil anything, but it does kind of lay the groundwork for where we're going to go with spoilers. So let me tell this analogy first, and then we'll get into spoilers. So this is essentially this movie, as I mentioned, and again, you can watch the trailers. This is not a spoiler. Beat for beat, this feels like a reimagining of the 2008 Strangers. That's really what it does. Beat for beat, they hit so many of the same beats in this movie. And when I left the theater, I was like, okay, so the idea here is that they're going to be moving into chapters 2 and 3. I know there's 2 more movies coming. They're doing it almost like Fear Street, except they're not releasing them week to week. They're releasing them. Chapter 2 is going to come out later this year, and Chapter 3 either late this year or early next year. Okay, I'm fine with all that. It's cool. It's kind of a cool release schedule. I'm into that. So I know the story's going to continue. So that was my first thought going in. Okay, I gotta be somewhat less judgmental, because I know whatever happens at the end, it's going to carry on. Okay, first thing. But ultimately, still, this first one, chapter 1, is hitting a lot of the same notes of the original Strangers. And the way I correlate this, the analogy I came up with is there was a real split, diverse, very divisive feeling about Rob Zombie's Halloween, his remake of John Carpenter's classic Halloween. Some people said it's brilliant, it's brutal, and it gives you something different that you didn't see in the 1978 version. You and I have praised that movie. We have said it's the scariest of all the Halloween films. It's the most brutal of all the Halloween films. Doesn't mean I like John Carpenter's any less. It just means that I really appreciate, and what Rob Zombie did was he gave you enough differences to where it just wasn't a shot-for-shot. Gus Van Sant made that mistake when he tried to remake Psycho, and he's like, I'm just going to make a shot-for-shot remake. And they're like, great. Well, guess what? Vince Vaughn and Anne Heche aren't nearly as fucking good as Janet Leigh and who am I forgetting?
Anthony Perkins.
Anthony Perkins. They're like, okay, great. You made a shot-for-shot remake with lesser people. Great. Good job. Imagine if Rob Zombie took Halloween. Now, for all the criticism you took about you gave too much backstory on Michael Myers and all this other stuff, and they injected the brother-sister storyline in that film, which, as you know, did not come out until the second Halloween in John Carpenter's, and that was only out of necessity. That was never in his original plan. It was only thrown in the second one because they're like, we need a sequel. Here's a whole bunch of money. Give us a story. And he's like, sure, they're brother and sister. That'll give you a way to continue carrying on the story. And then it ended up being a plot thread for, 20 other movies. But in the original, in Rob Zombie's Halloween, they introduced it on day one that that Michael Myers and Laurie Strode are brother sister. So imagine you sit down when you see Rob Zombie's Halloween. Was it 2007? That's when that came out, I think?
Yeah.
You sit down in 2007 to watch Rob Zombie's Halloween, and the opening is the little camera behind a mask, and the little boy stabs his sister, and you hear the parents go, Michael, pull the mask off, you find it's a 5-year-old boy. Oh, shit. And then you go to you just kind of fast forward, and you're in Haddonfield in 1978. Boom, you're all the way in the future. And Laurie Strode, and you meet Dr. Loomis, and there's Michael, and they escape from the escape. It's literally a shot-for-shot remake, and when it's over, while there are different, it's still Scout Taylor Compton playing Laurie Strode, and it's still, whatever. But when it's over, it's literally just a shot-for-shot remake of Halloween 1978. You'd be done, and maybe, a couple differences here and there, a couple tweaks and change, but storyline, plot, everything is pretty much the same. You'd be leaving the theater going, what the fuck was the purpose of that? Like, why? Like, we understand remakes are going to happen. We do. But if you're going to remake something, a lot of times it's for worse. I will admit that. But at least give me a reason to understand why you remade this. Dawn of the Dead, 2004's Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead. Its DNA is shared with George Romero's. But outside, it takes place in a mall and it's zombies. That's pretty much where it stops.
Otherwise, it's like a full reimagining, basically.
Yeah. But again, I'm fine. I love that.
I do. Yeah, but it's clearly like a full reimagining of the basic idea, which is what Rob Zombie actually did. He actually reimagined Halloween, and he left a bunch of people, whimpering and crying because he dared touch hallowed ground. But he still reimagined it and made it something that was wholly its own.
But imagine if you saw Rob Zombie's Halloween and it was just a 2007 updated version of John Carpenter's Halloween. No differences, no story differences, no character differences, no all the same. You'd be like, what was the point of that? Like, why did you do this? That's kind of how I felt about The Strangers. It's not bad. Again, Rob Zombie could make a cool remake of the 1978 Halloween without any differences. I'm sure it could still look cool, and I'm sure I'd like Scout Taylor Compton's performance and sure, all that. But at the end, I would still be like, why? Like, you didn't do anything different. You didn't do anything original here. Now, I'm not saying you should go full on Damon Lindelof and decide you don't want to make a prequel and just totally fuck up the alien mythology. But at least give me some reason to know why are you diving back into this? That's kind of how I felt about The Strangers Chapter 1. When I left, I was like, okay, it wasn't bad. But it just felt like the most unnecessary reimagining because it just didn't, there was no real difference except bad things. Like, they didn't improve upon it, and all the things that they did differently were worse, if that makes sense.
Let's get into spoilers, Damon.
Yes, please. So, Strangers Chapter 1 in theaters now. But does it make sense what I'm saying, though? Like,
It makes total sense because Damon, and now we're in spoilers, everybody, so plug your ears if you haven't watched this movie, or don't, because guess what? It's the same fucking movie. It's the same fucking movie, guys. And here's the thing, Damon. Okay, so, go back and listen to our Strangers podcast where we basically lick Brian Bertino clean. If he was in the mud afterwards, he'd be shiny clean. Fantastic movie. At the 30-minute mark of Strangers Chapter 1, the door knocks. At the 30-minute mark of Strangers 2008, directed by Brian Bertino, the door knocks. At the 30-minute mark in both movies, the door knocks. They open the door. The girl says, "Is Tamara here?" Like, it's it's the same. And I'm like, okay, I get it. We're getting back into that. And you said some of the beats. Damon, you were being generous. It's all the beats.
I was trying not to go full spoiler before we got
it's all the beats. I mean, slightly tweaked, barely tweaked. But what I'm saying, the beats are the same. Like, it's like, okay, this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. They gave our guy, what was it? I think in the movie his name is Ryan, I believe.
Brian.
Oh, no, he's Ryan. Yeah. So Ryan, they give Ryan a different reason to leave, which is actually kind of a better reason. I'll give them that. Like, there's a pro. He needed to go get his inhaler from his broke down car. But from that point on, the beats are just pretty much the same beats. And so you ask yourself, why, Damon? Why? You're very, you're a smart guy, and you go, why the fuck did they do that? Well, here's why I say this is a bad movie. It's not, again, if Strangers 2008 never existed, this is a passable movie. Maybe about a C-, I would say. And we'll get into reasons why it's a minus and not just a regular old C. But it's about a C- movie. Passable, standard horror fare. I've seen worse things this year. 100%. And I know you have.
Oh, yes.
I know you have. But why it's bad is because I went after watching from the 30-minute mark on, and I want to get into the first 30 minutes because they are different and very important, actually. But that beat for beat from basically the last hour of the movie, I thought to myself, they did not need to make 3 movies. They needed to just be confident in what The Strangers was in 2008 and start at chapter 2. Let the character of Maya have already been attacked by the strangers. I know I'm kind of rewriting the Living Dead, and I'm doing a little rewrite of the Living Dead, but for them to just present the strangers over again and then go, yeah, but we're gonna get into other stuff. Don't worry about it. Call it a fucking legacy sequel. Like, just do that. Just do that. Call it a legacy sequel. Don't worry about how you're gonna tie it in or anything yet, and just start in chapter 2. Start where this movie ends, and she can have little flashbacks that pay homage to the original. And da 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 da. It's clear to me that the producers said, "Hey, it's 16 years later. Let's get Gen Z in on the Stranger Thing." Sorry, that sounds like Stranger Things. Yeah, let's get Gen Z in on the Strangers and what it was by basically remaking it for them, so that Gen Z will be into it. And maybe they will. Maybe they're going to show up in the theaters this weekend as of this recording and go, hey, we like it. I don't think they will, because I think there's major problems with the first 30 minutes of this movie and a lot of what the characters do in the subsequent hour. But I think that was their whole intent. So what does that ultimately feel like, Damon? And that's a very ugly word. I don't like to use it. Or it's a phrase, rather. It's cash grab. I know how hard it is to make movies, and I've never even made a feature film. It's way too fucking hard. It's a super hard thing to do. They still made like a competently made film, despite my issues with the script. But they clearly just made it to kind of reel some people in. When what they could have done is some Halloween 2018 shit, which is say, there's a movie called The Strangers. If you haven't seen it, go fucking see it. And now we're doing The Strangers Chapter 2. Oh, interesting. Okay, Chapter 2. Okay, what's that all going to be about? And then give me a movie. Give me whatever you're planning for the actual Chapter 2 that's coming out later this year. Give me that movie, and then give me Chapter 3. And I'm hoping you're right, Damon. I'm hoping in Chapter 3 there's a little bit of a callback to the 2008 movie, and then it all fucking ties together, and we don't have this weird confusion that we just had. Just do that. And not do this. It's not that it's I don't know how. I'm very frustrated because it's clearly a remake that I don't think they're meaning to be a remake. They just want it to be a remake because they had no better ideas. They had no better ideas other than to go, let's just give them The Strangers again and hope they'll not notice. We noticed, because you remaking a really, really, really great movie.
So, a couple things. So, the first 30 minutes, where the differences, quote unquote, lie.
Yeah.
With the couple traveling cross country, and they decide to get hungry, and they just look on their app and they see a little one horse town with a diner, which huge issues. Like I've traveled, I've driven a lot. Okay. I live in the Midwest. I live in flyover states. I drive everywhere. Okay. I drive 9 hours places. And I never look on my app and I'm like, oh, here's a random diner on some off the shoot random road in the middle of nowhere. Let me stop there for dinner. Trust me, if you're on a major road, you're going to eventually find a truck stop or something else. But I'm not even going to begrudge them that, because, okay, that's how they got to get the story going. They get off the road, they find this little diner, and immediately, as soon as they get into this town, I have an issue. I immediately just start smacking myself in the head. Because the way they make this different, Patrick, ooh, spooky, is the whole town is creepy. It's a trope that's been overdone so many times in horror. What did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre do that was so brilliant? When they go to the gas station, and it's kind of a rundown, redneck-looking gas station, but it's, it is what it is, nothing out of the ordinary. But they inject one character, the hitchhiker, who is wackadoo, crazy, and fucking weird. And that kind of sets them off, and then, of course, they run into the family, the Sawyer family, and that's when the mayhem really unleashes. In this town, in Venus, Oregon, the entire town is just fucking weirdos. Everyone. There's not one normal person among them. The waitresses are weird. The mechanics are weird. The little weird Mormon kids that they bring back from the original are weird. Everybody's weird. Now, call me crazy, but if I land in a town like that and it's pretty clear that I'm not wanted and these people are looking at me like I'm from the moon, maybe I should get in my car and drive to the next fucking exit. Okay, so bad decisions start right there. But they don't. And so then they get there and they have dinner at this diner and everyone's just like staring. It's so unbelievably cliche. Everyone's staring at them. They have really awkward interactions with the people from there. I'm like, folks, this isn't. I understand, the whole, like, if you're from California and you come to the South and you go to like a rural town in Georgia or Alabama, yes, it's gonna be like My Cousin Vinny, where you're feeling like, you're the guy from Brooklyn and you don't belong in the southern one horse town. I get it. That's kind of what they're going for, but it's so unbelievably cliche that it made me bang my head against the chair. I'm like, is this really what we're doing here to set this movie apart? Is they're setting this one horse town, and then their car breaks down because it just randomly breaks down. It felt like, you remember the movie Breakdown with Kurt Russell, where he just stops at a gas station, his car breaks down, his wife goes missing, and all kinds of crazy shit happens. It's actually a pretty good movie, but like, so their car breaks down. The guy Ryan is already kind of suspicious. He's kind of being a dick, to be honest. Like this entire time, before anything really happens, he's a dick. And then, okay, so we're stuck here, and they're like, well, there's an Airbnb you can stay. It's just all so utterly convenient that these things happen. And on top of this, the entire town is just weird. So the first half hour to set the stage of them getting to this Airbnb, when basically The Strangers 2008 gets implanted into The Strangers 2024 in a less good version, everything leading to that is so cliche and predictable and mind-numbingly, like, just utterly, what's the word I'm looking for? Frustrating. Just utterly frustrating.
Yeah, if we sound a little frustrated, there's good reason. It's kind of a frustrating movie if you know Strangers 2008, which we do. I think there's actually a huge caveat to that. Like, I think if you don't know the Strangers 2008, I don't think you're gonna really give a shit. Like, it's still weird. It's still very weird. Like, this whole setup, like.
It just feels like I've seen this. This has been done like, what was so genius about the 2008 version, I'm not trying to compare it, but what we talked about was so lean. It was very, just the tension. Like, they never told us what happened between our lead characters. We just had to figure it out that, oh yeah, he proposed. Yeah. She said no, and they never say that out loud. They're just like, I thought you were ready, and I wasn't ready, and you have to figure it out. Oh, yeah, and there's a ring right there. Okay, you figure it out. They were going to get married, or he asked her to marry her. He asked her to marry him, and she said no, and now they got to engage in this awkward interaction at his family's house where they're planning to stay after a wedding. It's not complicated. Doesn't need to be complicated. They try to complicate it here. And when they inject all this other stuff like the weird town and the strange people, you're literally just like, hold on, where's the horror playbook? What's the horror playbook from 1984? Okay, let me pull that down, and let me pull that down. Let me just throw this all in the first half hour. And now it's a totally different story, except it's not.
There's a twofold problem, and I'm going to try and look at it from two angles here. The one angle is pretending like I don't know shit about Strangers 2008, which I think most people should try to come in with that mentality. If you're thinking anything right now, it's like, just try to erase that movie from your mind. But it's still going to be hard to forgive this first version, even though I'm pretending right now I don't know about that movie. This setup is so goddamn cliche, and not in a good way. It's cliche in like a bad way. And it feels like very outdated writing. Like, some of it's very 2000-y, some of it's like very 1980-y, and not in a good way, where it's just like, what? Like, no one acts like that. Like, it just felt ridiculously unbelievable. How odd the town was. Like, it really was. It was like jarringly weird. It's also jarring how Maya and Ryan behave. And that's more of a 2000s criticism. They are way more like that 2000s, like almost Dawson Creek style writing, which, by the way, Kevin Williamson, right? Dawson's Creek guy. Like, there's a weird chemistry between them. It's super fucking odd and feels outdated. It doesn't feel like a modern couple at all. It feels like a couple that existed in a time once had. So that's the weird part of that setup where you're just like, this is all super cliche, super dumb, and I don't buy it. Like, I don't buy that people are acting like this. It's clearly like it's like a movie. And it feels to me almost like the literal first draft. Like, literally, like, I'm just going to get it all out. We're going to do the worst possible cliches just so we can get it on the page and get the beats down. That's how that felt. Now, the second way of looking at it is looking at it from the lens of somebody who is obsessed with 2008's The Strangers. Now you've got a different problem with the first 30 minutes of the movie. Now it looks like a genuine setup. It looks like, and I'm going to credit Slasher Talk, who I follow on TikTok. He's a great guy, great horror creator, very honest guy. So if you want to follow Slasher Talk, he's somebody who's going to like actually tell you how he feels. Even though a lot of stuff he likes, I don't like, he's still like definitely telling it like this. So I'm going to credit him on this one because he was right about this. You feel very clearly like these two, Maya and Ryan, are being set up to end up in this Air BNB. The car breaks down. It's a very modern car. It's the kind of car where you can open it with an app on your phone. Modern cars don't fucking break down. They just don't. Like, you have to do something really bad to them. They give it a little bit of a reason. They almost had an accident. So they think, oh, okay, maybe it was like when that happened that it messed up something on the car. It's still bullshit. That shit doesn't happen. So it seems as though the town has sort of like targeted them. And the town has sort of guided them to this Airbnb where they're going to stay for the night. They know they're there. And even that little change when she goes to the strangers, why are you doing this? Because you were here. That takes the randomness from the 2008 movie and chucks it out the window into a pile of dog shit. And instead says, no, they're being targeted on purpose. This town, these oddballs, all of them strange, all of them weird. I mean, everybody. The late night burger joint is weird, and it shouldn't be. It's just like a bunch of young people hanging out, and they're still being weird. They're setting it up to say, we're laying the groundwork that this town has it out for you too. And they are literally handing you over to the strangers, is what it appears. I can't confirm it, but that's what they're doing. And that really ruins the idea of the strangers, which is the randomness. That would ruin the idea of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. If Leatherface and the hitchhiker knew you were coming the whole time and planned all this, it would kind of be weird. You'd be like, well, that's not very, I don't like that. That's what they're doing here. The randomness of the original 2008 movie is what makes it so terrifying by the end. That helpless, nihilistic, dour ending was, you were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, buddy. That's not the case with these people. And some of the clues that get sprinkled into the actual hunt between the strangers and Maya and Ryan indicate that this is probably a place where they kill a lot of people. At one point, she stumbles on a dead body.
Well, the opening is them hunting down somebody. The opening of the movie is them hunting somebody in the woods.
In the cold open, Damon, thank you, is the strangers hunting down some sort of rich guy and killing him in the middle of the woods. So that and that goes against the entire randomness of it. It's like, no, they put an axe in his head in the middle of the woods. They didn't do their little ritual tying him up, and they didn't do any of that. This is a place where the strangers kill people. So you are giving an origin story to the strangers, which we said, don't do that part. Don't screw it up by telling us that this is how they operate. Because the randomness is the thing. The randomness is the terrifying thing, and they've taken that away in this version.
The two things I said that I loved most about the original Strangers, not to rehash that review in a very short version, which is, one, this really could happen because this isn't supernatural. This isn't Jason or Freddy or Michael Myers. These are three people with knives and axes and opportunity in a weird rural area where people are isolated. So yes, sadly, in the world we live in, this could happen. And part two is, as you mentioned, the randomness. Because we all want reason. We all want to know why. We all want to know why this is happening to us. In any situation in life, in anything that we ever do in life, we want to know why. The randomness, the chaotic the chaotic what's the word I'm looking for? The chaotic world that we live in needs to be explained. That's just human nature. I get it. I understand it. But that's what makes that film so frightening, is because there is no reason. You were home. You did nothing wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. They were going house to house. You happened to be there, so you're getting fucked with. That's what was so terrifying about that. And as you said, they land in the weird town right away. You're like, okay, why are they just in this weird town? Like, everyone is weird. As we said, everyone is fucking odd and staring at them and immediately standoffish with them from moment one. It's almost like it almost would have made more sense if we come to find out that this was like some ultra rich couple and they were trying to rob them, because that's how purposeful this feels. Like, they're like, oh, your car's broken down. Well, there's one Airbnb in town. There's no motel. There's one Airbnb, and he rents it out. He goes hunting or he's out of town, so you can rent it from him. And that's the one place you can stay. Like you said, they're pointing them to where to go, and it's like they're sending their attack dogs after them. That ruins the whole purpose of The Strangers. What made The Strangers so terrifying is because A, it could happen to anybody, and B, there was no purpose behind it. You just happened to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes away. Now, there is the weird, and again, when we talk about beats for beats, there is the beat where Ryan has a shotgun, and like I was like, they're going to do the shotgun scene from the first movie. They're about to do it. I mean, that's how like on the beats they were. And sure enough, he turns the corner and he shotguns a guy who was there to fix the fridge, because they had called someone to fix the fridge earlier. And I was like, well, I saw that coming. So that whole scare surprise again, that's me using the lens of knowing the other movie. If you don't know that other movie, that might have been a shock to you. But then I go, okay, so is that guy just the handyman that you call? Like it raised a new question where the rest of the movie is pointing to like, no, that like this is the place where the strangers do their business. So I was like, well, what the fuck? Okay, so why did you rehash the shotgun scene with this guy? You know, to give them the keys, right? Like, that's the beat. Yeah, that's the beat. So they have a keys to get out, and then they rehash the scene where the strangers fucking stop them with their truck. I mean, they literally are just playing the old movie over again. So it's a muddy movie. It's a goofy movie. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about it in our categories, because the goofiness, it permeates the performances, Damon. I'll be as gentle as I can. This movie's just, I don't see the need for this movie. I think the mistake was making this movie. I know why. Because they wanted a new generation to get down with the strangers. Okay, cool. But you could have just done chapter 2. I promise you could have started with chapter 2 and been totally fine. Halloween 2018, I bet a lot of people who went to go see Halloween 2018 had never seen the original Halloween. I bet you cash money, that thing made a lot of money. And I bet you, I don't know, a good 40% of the audience had probably never seen the first Halloween. It's okay to just keep on going. These legacy sequels are honestly kind of good. The Scream legacy sequels, you pick up where you pick up, and it's like, it's fine. Like, don't spoon feed your audience shit, because it doesn't work out.
Well, and that's why I said this has to be a reimagining, because they hit so many of the same beats throughout the movie, from the truck ramming them to the axe coming through the door to the chairs being tied to the chairs to the stabbing them. I mean, it's just, again, like, it felt like the most unnecessary remake because they did nothing different.
Yeah.
The story being different does nothing. I mean, okay, so you get to the town, you get to a weird town instead of a wedding. Part also, by the way, because I know you keep playing like pretend you haven't or pretend you have seen this. The reality is we have seen this, so I can't pretend I haven't seen this. And I would wager, because The Strangers came out in 2008, and it was a very popular horror film that's permeated time. It's stuck around. It's not 30 years old, and it's not even like Rosemary's Baby, where people are like, Rosemary's Baby, I've never seen that. This is 2008. It's not a lifetime ago. I would wager most people going in to see this have probably, I would say, unlike the Halloween, which was 1978, I would wager at least 60 to 70% of the audience has seen The Strangers. It's a very popular, very viral movie.
Well, it's my same percentage. I'm saying 40% hadn't seen Halloween.
I'm saying, yeah, it's the flip side of this one. I think at least 60 to 70% have seen The Strangers going into this. It's a very popular.
You're saying the exact same thing I was saying. I was saying 40% hadn't seen it.
Yeah, I was saying the opposite. Like, at least 60 to 70% have seen The Strangers going into this version of The Strangers.
I'm saying the same thing.
But listen,
it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's a digression. It doesn't matter.
Let me finish what I'm saying. So you go in, so they try to change enough things to where you're like, oh, this is different. There's the couple and they're in Oregon and blah, blah, blah. But what they get wrong, like part of what makes the original Stranger so well done, even when Liv Tyler's character is stuck in the house by herself and the weird things start happening and we see the bag-faced man behind her and they burn her cell phone and like really weird, like really bad shit starts happening and she's really freaking out. And then Scott Speedman's character comes home and she's like, oh my God, there's something weird shit going on here. And for a moment or two, he doesn't quite believe her for two reasons. One, because it doesn't look like anything's out of place, like anything's wrong. And two, they've already laid the thread for the distrust between them because they were already at odds with each other. He didn't really like her that much in that moment because she said no to his proposal. So they were already like, they're on their way to being not a couple anymore. You and I both know, Patrick, when you have a fractured relationship, the way you act or treat towards that person is different immediately. And so him coming in that house and him kind of distrusting her, even for a minute, even for a split moment, you understand it. And that ratchets up the tension because she knows something's going wrong and he doesn't quite believe her. Here, the first interaction with The Strangers is the lights go out and Maya's character goes down to flip the lights on and she literally comes face to face with one of the strangers, freaks out, screams, runs upstairs, locks herself in a room, and then Ryan comes back, finds her huddled away in a closet, scared for her life. What's going on, babe? What's happening? There's somebody in the house. Oh, my God. They go down in front of the lights on. He thinks it's a clown picture behind her, which is so utterly dumb. And then they're like, oh, well, no big deal. Let's go down and sit and have dinner. Move on. They just move on.
Well, but you're missing one detail that I actually think they did pretty well, is that they establish, but they do it well, but okay. To back up, Maya thought she heard somebody, or no, the girl knocks at the door again while Maya's alone at the house. And then Maya's freaked out by that. But then for some reason, I mean, I don't feel like any modern woman would be like, okay, that person came back and I'm alone in the woods. I think what I'll do is I'll get drunk and get high. Which is exactly what Maya does. Which is
and take a shower too, which is also
and take a shower. Like these are none. I don't know one modern woman that would have this mindset. This was exactly my problem with Barbarian. It was like no modern woman is this stupid. Like and so like she was doing all this stuff, but it set up something very well when Ryan got back, and she was like, I saw like a doll faced person or something like that, and he's like, you've been smoking weed. And so that was but my point is that they at least set it up to where it made sense that he would go, I think you're seeing things because there's this picture right here and you're high currently. I mean, yeah, Damon, it's a proper setup. It's not like, is it great? It's not great, but it's not like they didn't do it correctly. Like they laid the groundwork. It's just the groundwork was rather stupid groundwork because I would have never believed a woman would have done that if she was alone in the woods and there were people outside. That's the part that doesn't make sense. Back there, when they actually interact and he goes, I don't think there's anyone here. And she and because I think, first of all, you're high off your ass, and she admits it. She's high and drunk, and there is a painting right where she said she saw somebody. So I go, Damon, I don't want to get too into it. I have been in scenarios where I'm like, you're definitely super high right now. So that I forgive that part. That part's not bad. Then they go to start eating, and then you're right, and it's in the trailer. The blood starts dripping, and then there's like a dead chicken up there, and then they realize, oh, something's actually wrong. Then they keep working over the beats, but they still do dumb shit. Like they really get attacked. You were talking earlier about how sadistic the strangers are. They're a little bit more sadistic in this movie. They're getting straight up axe attacked. They end up in a room. They're calling him Scarecrow this time around. The guy axes the fucking giant hole in the room that they're barricaded in, has a peek in there, and he's like, hey, and then he walks away. And then like seconds later, Ryan decides to get up and peek his head out. I'm not fucking doing that. There's an axe wielding fucko right over there. They make like categorically stupid moves like that didn't make sense. The original movie, they're always giving you pretty reasonable reasons for them to be doing what they're doing. I don't get that in this movie. So ultimately, Damon, these are just very stupid characters. Like just monumentally stupid. From minute one, they are dumb characters that make dumb decisions.
Okay, so I'm not going to argue with you about the whole painting thing because I still think that's a really dumb logic to go through. And trust me, I'm saying this as a guy who's been high and drunk a couple times in his life. The only times I've ever had that kind of fully whacked out visions was when I did acid, and that was totally different. Okay, but let's just hypothetically say, okay, that's all going to fit. Now again, you're in a strange place. There's a clown painting very conveniently behind her. Okay, fine. I'm going to move on beyond that. But the fact that they had to do that scene and then everything's fine again. They're just going to sit down and have a burger and they're chilling and talking and hanging out. That was what was so brilliant about the original Strangers, is because when he gets there, when Scott Speedman's character gets there, he's like, honey, this isn't real. Like, you're freaking out. Like, I'm not seeing evidence of what you're talking about. And then it actually happens. I think when he goes out to the car and he sees the car's all fucked up and he's like, oh, well, shit, I guess something is happening. And so that's when everything, and then like you said, like, so at that point, I don't understand the logic of having her literally come face to face. I'm talking 2 inches away from her face of the doll face girl. And then she disappears. And then her husband comes, or her boyfriend comes home. She's crying, freaking out, traumatized, scared out of her mind. And he's like, honey, you were high. She's like, oh, of course I was high. Okay, no big deal. Let's sit and have a fucking burger. It just, logically, it makes no sense. Because if you're that panicked, you're that traumatized by a scare, you're not going to just sit down and be, oh, yeah, no problem. Like, that felt like the most unnecessary meal of, like, all time. Just keep it going from there. You don't need them sitting down at the dinner table and the dead chicken to start dripping blood. I guarantee you, somewhere in the story process, somewhere in the screenwriting process, the script, the studio revision process, somebody said, we need to have another freaky scare to tell them what's going on here. How about we dangle a dead chicken from the chandelier and have it drip down blood on them? Wouldn't that be scary? They had nowhere else to put it because at that point, Ryan had already left to go get his inhaler and get them dinner. And they decided to start fucking with Maya like they did with Liv Tyler. So she's by herself. The knock comes back at the door. She hears creaking all over the house. We see the guy walk behind her. This is the exact same setup as Liv Tyler. Someone said, let's get one more scare in there. And that's how they did that. It was the most nonsensical moment because just keep it going. That's all they had to do is keep it going. When Ryan comes back and finds her all hidden away in the closet, just keep the terror moving from there. Don't stop to have a fucking burger because that chicken scare wasn't even that effective. It wasn't even that good.
They have this weird habit in this movie of making Ryan and Maya insufferable. Like anytime that they're together, they seem to be insufferable. You don't like them as a couple, not because they don't like each other. They're just fucking dumb. And like, they're not interesting people. And it's almost like they were, I'm almost disagreeing with you because I think what they just wanted another scene where you hated them for a little bit. Because when they interact as they're eating burgers, it's insufferable. It's that writing that that was pervasive in the early 2000s, where you're just like, literally no one talks like this. It's overly writerly is what I call it. It's just writers showing off how they can write, and they're ignoring how people actually interact. So nothing about it feels right. Like, you know, in Zoolander, the very famous like gasoline fight with Alexander Skarsgård, like No one would actually do that, but it was played for absolute like screwball comedy in that moment. They're going, how about if these models were so stupid they had a gasoline fight together and then they lit a cigarette and they all went up in flames. It's meant to be a completely ridiculous joke. But a lot of 2000s movies and this movie, they'll do little moments like that, not at that extreme, but they'll do little moments like that where you're like, nobody fucking acts like that. Like this goober Ryan is like eating his hamburger and getting ketchup all over his face. And then she makes a point of like pointing that out. And then he just starts smearing more ketchup all over. And I was like, who does this? No one does this.
And the whole point was when the blood starts dripping down from the chicken, they don't notice it at first. And it takes them a minute to realize it's not Ryan dripping his sandwich.
Yeah.
It's the chicken. It's just so
blood,
it's so nonsensical. And like that just felt like the dumbest gag in this movie. Like that was one of the differences in the beats because there was no dead chicken in the original Strangers.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was two characters in the original that you at least understood where they were coming from. Like I don't understand these two. They're not humans.
And that's why I said like the tension between Scott Speedman and Liv Tyler was understood. When he didn't quite believe her, it was just already drilled in that he's already kind of at odds with her anyways.
It's just a far simpler movie. Like they don't try to overcomplicate anything. Like they make it all make sense in the moment.
One of the reasons we love that movie is because it doesn't overcomplicate itself. It's very, and just like you understand, he proposed, she said no. It's very awkward. They still have to stay together tonight because this is where they're going to stay for the night. It's not easily for them to go home tonight. So they're stuck there together. And they almost have a moment of reconvening where they start having sex. They start to have sex, knock at the door. He decides to leave to go get her cigarettes. Now, I agree with you. The reason for him leaving in this movie was probably a little better, to go get his inhaler. I'm fine with that. It's a little convenient, but okay. And then going to get food. Okay, once again. But also, going to get food, this one horse town that has one diner apparently and one garage. They also have like a weird burger stand that's
like an all night burger stand never happens at the one horse town. They're closed at like 6.
And by the way, the same teenagers from the diner are now eating burgers at the burger joint. Like really? That's where we're going? Okay. Again.
Damon, all you can do in Venus, Oregon is eat. That's it. There's nothing else to do in Venus, Oregon.
It's literally the same people. The same 4 people that were in the diner earlier are now eating burgers at that exact point at night. That exact time, they're all eating that. Okay, I'm sorry. But again, when Ryan comes back, he has no reason to not believe her. And yes, I understand the weed thing, and that's kind of what you try to lay the groundwork, but it's so...
What I'm saying is those characters are so stupid that it does make sense that they interact in that way.
Yeah, in that way, you're right, because they're so utterly dumb that, I guess. But even in that, like, and the fact that she just moves on, like, oh, yeah, I just saw a creepy doll-faced girl. I'm sure I saw her, but you tell me I'm high, I've had a couple drinks. Okay, cool, let's sit down and eat some burger. It's just so nonsensical. Like, if she would have just kept being hysterical and he said, honey, you're high. You're high. This isn't happening. And she's like, I'm telling you this is happening. And then it starts happening and he realizes it's real.
Right.
That would have been such a cleaner way into getting the strangers in there than the whole, again, it just had a huge problem with the whole chicken prank. It was so dumb. But my compliment to this movie, and this is why the whole confusion about, is this a remake? Is this a reimagining? Is it, what the fuck is it? The killers, the strangers in this movie feel particularly like they're cruel and sadistic. Like they are fucking with these people more so than in the original Strangers. In the original Strangers, while they are doing that to a certain extent, part of the brilliance of that movie is at the end, after they stab them and they walk out and they meet the little Mormon kids and they're in the truck, they have that one line. The only line we hear besides the "you were home" is the next time it'll be easier or next time it'll go better or something like that. We get the indication that this was like a trial run. They're learning how to do this, which is
or like he's Baghead's teaching them how to do it.
Yeah, that's even more fucked up. This film feels like they've done this. Like this is not the first, and we know that by the cold open. They hunt down a guy in the middle of the woods and kill him. So this is not their first time. So it feels like the one genuine part of this movie that I did enjoy is the killers, the strangers, feel like they are full on brutally sadistic. Like they are fucking with these people. They can get them at any point. There are moments where when Scott Speedman is wielding that shotgun in the garage where the strangers don't come anywhere near there because they're like, he has a fucking gun. Like, he has a gun. And of course, when his friend comes in there, gets blown away, and then, that kind of sets everything off in the other direction. But up to that moment, they're just sitting there, and we said they were making every decision possible that's right. They're putting themselves in a corner where they can't be gotten from behind, gotten to the sides. There's one entrance, one exit, and they got a fucking shotgun pointed at that door. All you got to do is walk through there, and you're getting your head blown off. And the strangers don't come anywhere near there. This movie, it feels like they are purposely leading them and driving them in different directions to fuck with them throughout the entire movie. Now, that part I liked because it felt like these killers were more sadistic, more evil, more driven. That part I understood, and that's why I said if they do pull the twist at the end that this was a prequel, then that makes absolutely no sense because these feel like established killers.
It can't be. They have literally boxed themselves into a corner. It cannot be a prequel unless they are planning to retcon when the 2008 one took place, because there's multiple very specific reasons that are specific to the plot, Damon. One, their cell phones are modern. Two, they have an online banking app. Okay, so we know that the cell phones from the 2008 one, they're like push button ones that basically all you can do is number text on them. So the technology is far different. About 20, almost 15 years difference, much more modern. They're at an Air BNB. There's no such thing as an Air BNB in 2008. You can't undo that stuff. So there's no way it's a prequel. It has to be after the events of the 2008 one, if it still exists in that universe. We don't know. We're not sure.
Yeah.
We know for sure now that the strangers have definitely killed, because we see them kill in the opening, a totally random guy that I think that will come back. I think actually that's part of this trilogy. Since that guy has something to do with it. Two, when they are chasing them around this property, Maya, does find herself in a ditch, hiding very carefully, and one of the strangers, I think it was like a pinup girl or someone, was standing over her, not quite seeing where she was, but she was definitely hanging out in that area for a moment. And when she walks away, Maya turns and sees that there is a rotting dead body right next to her in that ditch. Clearly another body that has been killed. Probably it might have been that guy. I don't know, but I couldn't really tell from the body. But it looked really old and decrepit. So I'm like, well, maybe it was like another body. Maybe this is a place where they kill a lot of people. So we're definitely past the original film by the time this thing ends. Now let's talk a little bit about the end, Damon. So it ends very similarly to The Strangers, which is, they're both sitting in chairs next to each other. He proposes to her, which is, I don't want to get into that part, which is their workaround for, it's stupid.
There was an audible groan in my auditorium tonight when that happened, when he's like, will you marry me? And my theater was pretty full. I would say it was a 10 o'clock show, so it was a late show. There was probably 30 to 35 people in there, which is pretty good for a late show and for a smaller theater. And I'm not kidding. Everyone, when he's like, will you marry me? Everyone in the theater went,
This movie's got a lot of, and it goes just, again, beat for beat, like the original Strangers. He gets what seems like completely killed. She gets partially killed, and they have to run away because they hear sirens coming, which I have theories about that too. I think that might actually just be a setup. There's no reason you cast Richard Brake as the sheriff, show him in one scene, and then he never comes back again. I think there's more to that story. That's my theory. And then she wakes up in a hospital bed, alive. And you saw that there's like a little like mid-credit scene as well, right?
Yeah, there's a post-credit scene right there, yeah.
Yeah, there's a little mid-credit scene where she wakes up in her hospital bed and decides to get up, and the Scarecrow Man is sitting right next to her. Like they're still on the hunt for her. This is not over. Okay, Damon, it's not over. I wish this movie had been over far sooner than it started. Again, my whole thing is, please just have made chapter 2. We didn't need chapter 1. It didn't add anything to the universe, but they are clearly, in my opinion, with the weird town, with the Airbnb, with the jump in time, because I do think it's the same strangers. They're setting us up for two more chapters that will ultimately culminate in something that calls back to the original. I really do think that's coming.
Maybe so. Again, that was my theory. At the end, we're going to see Liv Tyler because we never found out what happened to her at the end of the original Stranger. She screamed at the end, and that was how the movie ended. And it was a freaky scene, and we're all like, oh shit. And we kind of talked about that with our episode about the Strangers, where we said maybe she was traumatized. You know, she survived, but she didn't really survive. Kind of the Laurie Strode thing, where she made it out, but she's never the same. Maybe that's what they're going to tie back here. I don't know. Maybe that's where they're leading and why they're so hesitant to tell us what this is supposed to be. I do agree. They make a point of telling you the guy that got killed at the beginning when they show his missing poster in the diner, and they're like, he was some kind of finance guy that was traveling to her. Why do you mention that specifically? So there's got to be some bigger orchestration happening here that's going to tie in by the third film when they finally unmask the Strangers, because it's happening. The third film, they're finally going to show their faces. There's no way we're going to get to the end of this third film, we don't find out who's behind the mask. It's going to happen, and it's going to be some kind of plot point to this entire movie that we figure out who the Strangers are. But yeah, the ending, I will say, and I will give it credit, one thing I actually didn't like about the ending, when they stabbed Ryan, which I was so glad when they stabbed him, because boy, did I not like that character. When they stabbed him, and it was cool because they tied them up much more than they did in the original Strangers. They had them tied in their shoulders and their waists, and they were like, you were not getting out of these fucking chairs. When they stabbed Ryan, it was almost like all of the ties were almost like a what's the word I'm looking for, like a tourniquet in a way. They stab him, it's almost like keeping the blood in, and so the bag-faced man, the Scarecrow, whatever the hell they're calling him, kicks him over in the chair, and he falls over, and just blood goes pouring out. It's like it gets knocked out of him, and he goes pouring out of his mouth, and you realize he's dead. I actually really like that. I'm not spoiling later categories. I actually thought that was kind of cool. Then they stabbed Maya and did the same thing, kicked her over, but she doesn't bleed out the same way because the cop cars, the sirens hit, and they're coming in, and so the Strangers got to get out before anything else happens, and that's, as we find out, Maya survives in the hospital, and that sets us up for the sequel. Yeah, okay, Maya's going to be our lead character, and we all know the story's going to take place over 5 days, so we're not going to, this isn't a flash forward like 4 years in the future, and she's, making out or whatever. This is her this is Halloween 2. This is Laurie Strode, the night of Halloween, making it to the hospital, and Michael Myers continuing to hunt down his sister. That's what we're getting here.
Yeah, that's what we're getting here. And it's somehow, if it is actually tied into the Strangers universe, then that means it has to stop before Prey at Night, because in Prey at Night, spoiler alert, the Strangers don't make it out of that movie. Unless these are a whole new batch of Strangers. I don't think they are. So yeah, like a lot's got to get wrapped up. I'm very curious to see where it all goes. Kind of. I don't know. I guess I'm curious because Ryan won't be part of the rest of the. Ryan was a terrible character. Not Freud Gutierrez's fault. He's a fine actor. There's nothing wrong with his acting. Poorly written character.
Let me tell you right now, if I was in that same situation and I needed someone to protect me, I would hide behind Madeline Pesh before I would hide behind Ryan.
Yes.
Ryan was like, and I don't listen, I'm not, not pointing fingers. I'm not trying to, say bad words, but Ryan was, what's the word I'm looking for here? He was a cuck. He did not look like he could have protected anything. He looked like he would have been the guy hiding behind her skirt this entire movie. Like he was, I hate to use the word, but I'm going to use the word. He was a bitch. Like he just seemed like the weakest dude. Like there's a point where he actually gets a shotgun. I'm like, this dude does not know how to use a shotgun. I guarantee you, he has no idea how to load a shotgun. He'd be the guy that would touch the shotgun in like, what's that movie? Oh God, Spaceballs, where Princess Vespa goes, I hate guns. Like that would be him. He would drop it and be like, I can't touch this. What's this gun? Like they make Ryan such a manicured pretty boy. There is no way that he would be like any realm of a survivor in this movie.
You're right, but what I think was interesting is that like he thinks he's tough. There are guys, like if he had been established as a character who is clearly like, hey, I hate guns, I don't like that stuff, like okay, then I would understand it. He's putting on an air, which is a good kind of way to paint him as a douche. He puts on an air that he's tougher than he is, and it's very clear that he's not.
it's not that he's tough. He's arrogant. He's a cocky guy. He's a very cocky guy.
He's cocky, but you know, at least you do know that, like, oh, he's cocky, but it's all bullshit. Like he's not that guy, but he wants people to think he's that guy. So I was like, well, I appreciate that, but he was one of those guys where it's just like, he ain't gonna be able to do shit.
And I don't want to knock. I'm not trying to knock the guy. What's his name? Floyd. What's it?
Floyd Gutierrez. Yeah.
Floyd Gutierrez. I'm sure he's a fine actor. I'm not. I really, dude. If you ever listen to this, he's gonna be like, I hate these guys. I'm not saying it's wrong with your performance, and I'm not even saying I wish you hadn't gotten this part. Let me be clear about that, because it's not him. It's not him, but the choices they made with that character in terms of, like, he was like perfectly a manicured pretty boy.
Yeah.
He looked like such a city guy, and like they made it so obvious that he was not tough in any way. She was arrogant. He was a cocky dick for most of the movie, but like not tough at all. And they kind of paint him as a bit of a tough guy towards, like, he's the survivor. Like, he's protecting, she's the damsel in distress.
Yeah.
For the biggest part of the movie, and he's protecting her. Hide behind me, you'll be okay. That would be the last fucking guy I would hide behind. I'm telling you right now. Like, that would be like, dude, move out of the way. Like, you are 100% a red shirt in Star Trek. You are cannon fodder. You are 100% going to get wiped out here. And that's the part. Like, Scott Speedman, who is a good actor, good character actor, been around for a lot of years. He was in a tux in the original movie. He didn't look like a tough guy, but his mannerisms, the way he carried himself, he just looked like, he didn't look like a survivalist. And even in that moment when he has the gun, he's like, I lied to you that I didn't go hunting with my father. Right. He just admitted it. This is the guy who's like, oh yeah, I can save you, babe. And he's like, I got the shotgun. Scott Speedman's character carried himself like an actually confident dude who admitted, hey, I really don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm going to get us through this. And in that moment, you're like, I trust you, Scott Speedman. You may not know what you're doing. You're not going to hotwire a car. You're not going to, MacGyver a way out of the fucking room. And, you're not that dude, but you're being honest saying, listen, I'm going to do my best to get us out of here. That was his attitude. And you're kind of like, dude, I'll go with you. This guy, the moment he's like, hey, babe, get behind me. I'll stick my head out the door that was just had an axe guy in the front of it 5 seconds earlier. I'll protect you. The entire movie, I'm thinking to myself, this is the last fucking guy I'd want in front of me, beside me, behind me in this situation. And that's the writing. And that is the way that it's the writing, and it's the way, it's the casting also. I'm sorry, Freud, you're not a bad dude, but you don't look like you don't look like you would last long in this situation.
Yeah. Young pretty boy is kind of the look he's going. Anyway, he was on the show Teen Wolf, by the way, which was full of young pretty boys. I mean, come on, like that's what that show was. But you're right. Like, actually, I'm kind of giving Froy some credit, saying like he played the bullshit the douche full of bullshit, like fully full of bullshit.
But he survived far longer than he ever should have with that kind of attitude.
Well, that's a script problem. Yeah,
that's the script. Like he 100% would have been dead. The minute he stuck his head out the fucking door, where the axe guy was just 8 seconds early, he's like, they're gone.
Yeah.
I was like waiting for the axe to come down on his head. I was waiting for the axe to come down on his head. Like, okay, at least that happened. That didn't happen. So yeah. Anyways, all right. Let's get into categories, because clearly we have some thoughts on this one. Patrick, let's kick things off as you do in each and every week. I know your best performance. This is hilarious. What is your best performance in The Strangers Chapter 1?
It sounds like I'm being a dick, but we said it clear enough. Like 9 times out of 10, there's nothing wrong with the performance. It has everything to do with the script. So my best performance is Richard Brake, who plays Sheriff Rotter. Richard Brake is in one scene, and he's Richard Brake. And if you're a genre fan like Damon and I, you know who Richard Brake is. He's been in a ton of stuff. He's been in Rob Zombie movies and all this shit. Like he got that face. He was in Barbarian, actually. So he's been in a ton of genre stuff, and he plays the cop. I think he's coming back. I don't think we've seen the last of Richard Brake's character, Sheriff Rotter, in this movie. But yeah, he was the only performance where I was like, well, that's fine.
By performance, you mean he gave us one glance and doesn't actually have any lines?
Damon, listen, I said what I said, okay? Richard
That's what I
Brake,
said.
looking forward to you.
So let me give Richard Brake here. I'll give Richard Brake credit this. I just saw a great little movie called Last Stop in Yuma County, which stars the Barbara Crampton. He plays one of the characters in that alongside our good one of our favorites, Jim Cummings. He is great in that movie. He plays a crook in that movie. He's incredible in that movie. I love Richard Brake. I actually said this years ago, and I think maybe he's a little too old for it now, not because he's not a talented guy, but I was thinking like a younger-ish actor who could carry on the role for several years. I said a decade ago, Richard Brake would have been the perfect candidate to play the new Freddy Krueger. When they were saying that, like, Robert Englund's like, I'm done, I'm backing out of the role, and they're going to make a new one. And I was like, please, for the love of God, do not put Jackie Earle Haley's short ass in another movie. Richard Brake was like one of my early choices of like, this guy could pull it off. That guy has that creepy ass demeanor, the voice, the stare, the stoicness. He has everything you need for a scary ass Freddy Krueger. I think he's a little old now because if they're going to do a series of Nightmare on Elm Street films down the road, probably a little too old for that now. But I thought he would have been perfect. So he's great in Last Stop in Yuma County. So, but I loved your choice because when I saw your choice, I was like, that's funny because he doesn't even speak in this one. So, so my best performance, and I go a little deeper than that, but not a whole lot. My best performance goes to Ben Cartwright. Do you know who Ben Cartwright is in this movie without looking at IMDb? I bet you don't.
No, I do. Ben Cartwright. Oh, God damn it. He was in this movie. Who the fuck was he? All right, who was he? Because I know I saw it.
He was Rudy, the car mechanic.
That's right. Okay, thank you. Yes.
Now, why did I like Rudy the car mechanic? Because they painted every weird person in this town with the biggest generic, stereotypical brushstroke that you could possibly have in one single movie. The waitress in the restaurant was rude. When they suggested vegetarian food, everyone in the place grumbled. There was one kind of cool waitress who was kind of younger and hipper.
But the things that came out of her mouth were so ridiculous. It didn't matter how cool she was.
It was the most stereotypical. They were like, it was a color by numbers of like, what do weird people look like in small towns? Okay, this is what they must be like. Ben Cartwright played Rudy, the car mechanic. Imagine, if you will, the car mechanics from National Lampoon's Vacation, the ones who are like, how much you got, boy? And he's like,
yeah.
How much you want? All of it, boy. They're like, hey, that's a good character. Let's throw him in here. He does a good enough job for playing the weird, creepy mechanic who clearly fucked with their car and set them off on this path of destruction to get killed. But he plays the creepy mechanic perfectly fine. So for what they gave him to work with, which was not a lot, Ben Cartwright did a good job playing the creepy mechanic.
Yeah. Congratulations, Ben Cartwright, on your role as the mechanic. You really did one for us, buddy.
Yeah, you did something there. So our next category, Patrick, isn't one that we bring up every single week because it's very special. It's a very unique category. And this movie kind of calls on that, and it kind of brings back a category that we started a while ago and only comes up in very specific episodes.
One testicle!
It is named after the great Nicolas Cage in the movie Prisoners of Ghostland, where he goes full Nicolas Cage. And in The Strangers Chapter 1, there is somebody here that goes full Nicolas Cage, giving their best overacting performance. Patrick, please explain to us who wins the rare One Testicle Award on Rewind of the Living Dead for The Strangers Chapter 1.
Damon, this very prestigious award is granted to our lead, Madeline Pesh as Maya. She receives our One Testicle Award this week. It's really a performance that's very reminiscent of this content creator. I think her name. Let me double check it to get so I get it right. Delaney Rowe. Have you ever heard of her?
I don't think I have.
If you look up Delaney Rowe, she's on Instagram. She's on she's on TikTok, and she basically makes fun of how characters act in movies, and she does like an amazing job of it. The character of Maya is literally the character that Delaney like portrays, and she's usually called insufferable indie woman in a movie. And like, it was almost to a T. I was like, is she doing an impression of Delaney Rowe? because it's great. Like you go, it makes you cringe because a lot of writers write their female characters that way. And these guys clearly wrote their female character like that. And I mean, it was very out loud as best I can tell you, Damon. I've never quite seen overacting on this level for this sustained amount of time. Now, that's talking about for basically the first half hour to 45 minutes of setup. Then it gets into basically the strangers where she has to kind of crawl around and scream and be terrified as she's being chased by the strangers. Then she kind of reverts to what your standard kind of final girl scream queen style. But that first 30-minute setup that establishes who this character is, yeah, Damon, one testicle award all day long.
It's funny you say that because while I do agree and understand where you're coming from in that first 30 minutes, I actually felt about the one testicle award for the last hour of the film because it feels like, again, and to be fair, I like Madeline Pesh. I watched Riverdale for a lot of seasons. I actually really liked that show when it first started. It kind of careened off the edge in later years and I stopped watching it. But a lot of careers were launched off there, particularly the trio of lead actresses who were on there, Lily Reinhart, Camila Mendez, and Madeline Pesh. And I like Madeline Pesh. I think she's fine. She was good on the show, but we've said on this podcast many times when we talk about performances, there's two styles of acting that are harder to do than any other. And if you talk to most actors, they will tell you this is true. Comedic acting and acting scared or being in a horror film, because there's two very specific emotions you have to invoke, and they're not easy to do because you can see through them really clearly when it's bad. With comedy, it's all about timing. If you don't have good comedic timing, it will backfire on you spectacularly. And there are actors who are Academy Award-winning actors who will tell you they cannot do comedy because they do not have the timing for it, and it will end badly. That's not a bad thing, right? By the way, I'm just being clear about that. Like there are amazing actors who just don't. How many times have you seen Daniel Day-Lewis in a comedy? I'm not saying he can't do it because that guy seems like he could do anything, but I think there's probably at least some reason he never did it. Maybe he didn't have the timing, you know? And scared is the other one. Horror films is the other one because you have to act scared. And while, yes, there's methodology and you don't meet your co-stars and you get legitimately jump scared and things like that, ultimately, no matter what horror film you're in, you have to act. You have to put the portrayal of being terrified on screen. It's not one sustained method acting performance where they're literally chasing you around with a hatchet and you're scared for your life. It's not that. You have to be able to act scared. And I think Madeline Pesh tried a little too hard to act scared in this film. There are several moments where she's just full on face crying. I don't know a better way to say it. Like her face is scrunched up and she's just looking, she has that down mouth. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm not
I know what you mean.
correct. Just a little bit too much. Like, I know you're scared, but you're not that tortured in the face with what you're doing. And it just felt like she was doing the this is how I should look when I'm scared version. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like, this is what I think people look like when they're scared. And so that's the version I'm giving you.
She made that choice, you know, like that was the choice of how she wanted to look scared. You know, I know what you're talking about. And that part of it didn't bother me the way it bothers you, but I know what you mean. Like she's making big faces. I mean, one testicle is about going over the top. That's the whole point of the award. The whole point of the award is kind of going over the top. And Madeline Pesh definitely goes over the top in The Strangers and probably in chapters 2 and 3 as well, because it was all shot at the same time. So she's kind of in the same moments throughout the whole thing. So we'll see how it goes. There's
also one other thing to kind of, and this is not her fault. This is probably more on the director and more likely the cost or the makeup person on the film. I mean this like people are like, wow, that's a weird knock to make a Madeline Pesh. I'm just putting it out there. She's a very beautiful, beautiful woman. She is. For being a woman terrified and running for her life for a better part of an hour of this film, she looks to be an incredible shape by the end of it. Like in terms of like the way she looks, she does not look like she's been through hell.
Her hair's doing pretty well. Her makeup's doing great. That's a little bit more on the hair and makeup side of things.
That's not on her, but like she's a very beautiful girl, and I understand you have to, but when you're being tormented by 3 killers, chased through the woods, crawling under space, all these things that you do in this movie, you're going to get a little uglied up. And by the end of this film, she still looks very much like Madeline Pesh, who is a gorgeous person. I'm just saying, like you would look a little more fucked up in these moments, and she did not look a little bit fucked up at all.
Yeah, I mean, you can still be very gorgeous, and your hair will be completely disheveled, and your makeup is smeared and all that stuff. You can still be beautiful. There's nothing there that the beautiful parts, that part's not an issue. But it is like, well, wasn't she like running through the woods and literally like under piles of like branches and leaves and getting tossed around and all that stuff, and her hair is like perfectly combed? That's a director issue too, because the director should look at the continuity and go, she should look more messed up here. Let's like bring hair and makeup in and like let's mess her up a little bit more to make it make sense. So yeah, it was weird how clean she kind of stayed throughout the whole movie.
It reminds me a lot of a show that I absolutely love, and I do love the show, but it reminds me a lot of Lost. Like how the women in that show were always like way too manicured and pretty and not like
their hair was looking
hairy.
great.
Yeah, they look completely manicured for people who lived on a deserted island for 6 months or 5 months or however long they're supposed to be there. Like you're supposed to look like Tom Hanks in Castaway. That's how you're supposed to look when you've been stuck on an island for 5 months. You're not supposed to look like a model. And by the end of this movie, Madeline Pesh still looks very much like Madeline Pesh. All I'm saying, just throw it out there. Patrick, next category. Let's move on to our next category, and that is going to be our MVP. So, Patrick, when it comes to The Strangers Chapter 1, did you have an MVP?
I did, Damon. I did. Actually, our MVP this week, I'm going to give it to this. They're calling him the Scarecrow in this movie, which is the kind of the main or the boss stranger. You talked earlier about how they're more sadistic this time around, and they certainly give moments to the Dollface and to a pinup girl, but something about Scarecrow guy, as we're calling him, he had a different menace to him that almost was more reminiscent of a traditional slasher. Something about him this time around felt more like that. And you kind of got to see him be a little more brutish and all this good stuff. So I had to give it up to him because I was like, you know what? Of all the things in this movie that I have problems with, I really, really liked that character.
So I'm cheating here because you used 1 character and I'm using 3, and I already mentioned it and I don't want to rehash it, so I'm just going to say it again. My favorite part, my MVP of this performance, and the reason why this film did, at least in some small ways, even though all the beats are the same, differentiate itself from the 2008 version, as I said earlier, is these strangers were more sadistic. So I went with just the strangers because the one thing that I think they got right with this movie that feels like a carbon copy of the 2008, just not done as well. It's like the Machine Gun Kelly version of Eminem. It's kind of Eminem, but not good. You're not the good version. They make them sadistic. Again, I do not get the sense that these are first-time killers. Like, you kind of get that sense these are by the end, as I mentioned earlier, they're saying, next time will go better, whatever. These are experienced killers. At least Baghead, man, and he's leading and kind of teaching and leading the other 2. And there's a moment where this almost got my one testicle award. This was also me talking about how Ryan was the least toughest character, and they gave him the toughest line with the most 80s feel to it ever, and it was so bad. So at one point, Ryan manages to sneak up on, is it the pinup girl? I think it's the pinup girl.
I think it's pinup girl. I think it was.
He puts the shotgun to the back of her head. He catches her. He tells her to walk forward, drop her knife. He's looking like a legit badass for about 2 seconds. Then he delivers the line. You know what line I'm talking about, Patrick.
I do, Damon.
This is after he's traumatized because he shoots the owner of the Air BNB in the face, which in the original is the guy's friend. But in this one, he just shoots the random owner of the house. He freaks out, panics, cries, "Oh my God, I killed someone. I can't handle this. I'm in traumatic. And I get that. I imagine.
Oh yeah, sure.
I'd imagine
Makes
any
sense.
normal person who blows someone's head off, you're going to be freaked out about that.
One would hope.
But he puts the shotgun to the back of her head, and he delivers what might be the cheesiest line in a horror movie in a while. And I say this because this is like a produced horror. This isn't like a B-level, straight to Walmart bin movie. He says, "You know how they say your first kill is the hardest? Well, guess what? You're my second." And then he still fucks up because the baghead man smacks him in the head, knocks him out, and then he gets captured and ends up waking up. It is remarkable that somebody wrote that dialogue, put that in the movie. It went through editors, directors, studios, everybody, and they said, "Man, that line hits." You know what, Patrick? They say the first kill is the hardest. Tell me you did not cringe when he delivered that line.
Yeah, because I knew what was coming. I just knew. I was like, oh no, he's gonna say that, and then he's not gonna kill her, and then like someone's gonna attack him, and that's exactly what happens. There was no subversion.
But up to that moment when he's got the shotgun in her face and she screams at him and she's just basically like, "Do it!" Like she's putting.
She's giving him her one testicle. She's like, "I don't give a shit." She's like, "Go ahead, shoot me in the fucking head," because she knows he done got the stones to do it.
And that's why this felt more sadistic. Like she's fucking with him. She's not just like there to kill him. She's there to mess with him mentally. And so that's why I said I like the strangers are more sadistic. So even in that moment, which ended badly with the bad line, even up to that point when she's like literally grabbing the gun and putting it to her head, like, do it, pussy, shoot me. And he doesn't do it because, he's Ryan and he's Ryan. But in that moment, that, along with every other thing we see in the movie, is them being really cruel to this couple. They're not just there to capture and kill them. They're there to torture them. And that felt a little different character-wise than the 2008 version.
Yeah, it did. Definitely. So yeah, they're more sadistic. So, props to them. You might as well up the ante, right? You're going to keep introducing them to audiences, make them crazier every time out.
Yeah. So next category is, of course, best scare. And it's weird, Patrick. Like, this is beat for beat a lot of the same scares, but they just didn't work as well for me in this movie. And probably because I knew they were coming.
Right.
But what was your best scare in The Strangers Chapter 1?
Yeah, this was a tough movie to pick scares because you knew everything that was coming, and even the things that were kind of new, you still knew were coming. And my best scare, I really just picked it because it really scared the shit out of the audience, was the axe in the door. You actually see it in the trailer. Like, there's a point where Maya's kind of like near the door, and then the axe comes right at her face. That my whole audience jumped out their fucking seats. That one really got them.
It's funny you say that. I read an interview with Madeline Pesh where she talked about that because it was all practical effects, which to their credit it was, and I do enjoy that about this movie. That's another thing I should give in the pros. All practical effects. I appreciate that. There was no really bad CGI in this movie, and that was good. But she talked about when they filmed that scene that she had a very specific mark, and it was their stunt director who was literally slamming an axe through the door.
Yeah.
And she had to hit her mark perfectly, and she had to trust that he was going to hit his mark perfectly. Because when you watch the movie, the axe is not that far away from her face. Now, understanding that, you would hope that this is a very professional shoot, although we do know what happened on that Alec Baldwin movie, so you just never know. We could be talking about the movie where Madeline Pesh got an axe to the face. But in this case, it did work out okay. But that was all practical effects. That was all really done. They just hit their marks, and that was really an axe coming at the door, and really Madeline Pesh a few inches away.
All you actors who are like, I don't need to hit my mark, you better fucking hit your mark when it's time for a stunt, or things will go terribly wrong.
Yeah, so my favorite scare was the one that was a little different in this movie, and it's the one that they kind of took away from us because of the whole way that Ryan explains it away with her being high and drunk, which is when the lights go out in the house and she goes down to search for the fuse box, and she searches through a few different closets, and you're just waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for one of the strangers to pop out of the closets. I was convinced like this is going to be that they're going to have the classic like move the clothes aside and they're going to be there. Oh man. But they actually did a nice little twist there where she finds the fuse bucket and turns, and then there's the pinup girl right behind her, and she fucking freaks out, and rightfully so. And that's why I said the whole excuse for being high and drunk. The pinup girl was like literally 3 inches away from her. She wasn't like across the room where the painting was. She was literally right in front of her. But again, I'm not gonna.
Hey, weed is strong these days.
Yeah, really strong. And they actually say that in the movie, which is funny. She's like, you know how strong that weed is. But yeah, that scene was good because when she turned and she was right there in her face. I was like, that was this movie's version of the pulling over the curtains and the baghead man was right in front of Liv Tyler. Kind of like that. It was like that version of that in this movie where the pinup girl was right in front of her in the house as she turned around. I thought that was a pretty effective jump scare.
Yeah, that got a lot of people. Honestly, everybody in my theater was reacting to all the scares, I think, the way that the filmmakers intended to. Maybe a lot of them hadn't seen the original Strangers or not, but all I know is that the scares were definitely working for those people.
Yeah. Let's talk about best gore, because this is a horror movie, and there is some gore in this movie. So, Patrick, what is your best gore in The Strangers Chapter 1?
Beat for beat, Damon, my favorite gore is the same gore from the original Strangers in 2008, which is Joe's face. Now, Joe is the guy who is coming to repair the refrigerator, and unbeknownst to him, Ryan is rounding the corner with a shotgun pointed right at his face, and he blows his face clear to hell the same way I think it was Mike who got his face blown away in the original Strangers. And that's probably one of the better bits of gore in the movie. You know, they kind of cut away and you can see his face is basically ground beef.
That was great. And again, practical effects did a really, really good job of that. And once again, the head being blown off was effective. So good job, effects guy. So my favorite gore also happens to be my favorite scene in the entire movie. And this is, as you can tell, like there's beats in this movie that I really like. It's just when you look at it's like you have to, when you draw back out, look at the whole picture, it's not great. But when you kind of drill down, there's some good moments in this movie. Yeah. My favorite part of this entire movie was when they're stuck in the room trying to get away from the strangers, and Madeline Pesch's character, Maya, who we do explain earlier is an architect, she understands the architecture of the house. She says this is a stilted house. I can't remember how she explains it. Yeah. She's like, that means there's a crawl space. There's the way the foundation is built. It's a stilted foundation, I think is what she says. Yeah. Which means there's a crawl space underneath the house. Not all houses have that, of course. She knows it because she's an architect. They actually put her job in the movie to use. I was like, good job. That was actually a piece of writing I really enjoyed. They actually explained she's an architect, and they used it for her escape. She goes out into the crawl space, and they're basically underneath the floorboards of the house listening to the strangers walk around upstairs. And there's a rat. Again, this is pulled down from, tropes of every horror film we've ever seen before. But the beat that I knew something was going to happen, and it did, but it just worked really well. And that's why I said, even if there's only so many ways you could do a horror film. And yes, you could be totally creative and make something new, and we'd love that. But there's nothing wrong with using tropes as long as you use them effectively. Just like a slasher film. There's only so many ways you're going to make a slasher film. But when you can come up with Scream, you did it differently. She's crawling through. There's a rat on Ryan. Again, this feels very Indiana Jones. And then she puts her hand out, and her hand goes through a nail in the floor. And she can't scream, so she does the muffled, like,
Yeah.
And the nail is like just through her finger. Now, that's my favorite gore because it's so visceral.
Yeah.
I've stepped on a nail. I'm sure at some point in your life, you've had some situation with getting stabbed accidentally through something. I don't know what. Mm-hmm. We all have. I have stepped on a nail. I've had a glass shoved into my hand by accident. I had a broken glass, and I reached under the carpet. It literally shoved into my hand and cut a giant hole in my hand. It sucks real bad.
It sucks.
And when she did that, she put her hand down, and she's like, and the blood. And then there's a point where Ryan tells her 1, 2, 3 silently and pulls it out. Very visceral. I felt it in that moment. That was like the nails on the chalkboard in Jaws, where I was just like, yeah, I can feel that. So that was honestly my favorite scene in the entire movie. Them crawling through the crawl space, even though I've seen that scene a million times, they did it effectively enough to where when she stuck her hand on that nail and they're jabbing and they're pulling that nail out of her hand, I was like, fuck this moment. This sucks.
Yeah. The nail through something always fucking sucks. And that was a good little nail moment.
Yeah. All right, Patrick, let's move on to our next category, which is, can we survive this horror film? I have a feeling we're going to have a slightly different opinion on this one. The Strangers Chapter 1. Can I tell you why I'm going to survive this horror film? And I know people are going to say, Damon, come on now. You're being a little bit obtuse about this, but I'm not. Here's why I survived. Here's why I survived this horror film. Now, I'm not saying you're not a tough guy, Patrick. You're a jiu-jitsu guy. You're an MMA guy like me. But you are a California kid. I grew
don't know
up.
What that means.
Hold on. Let me explain. I grew up in the Midwest where I lived around towns. I grew up in a town that was not that far off from Venus, Oregon. Like my hometown. If I could tell you some of the things that happened in my hometown, it'd make your head spin in like the ways that town has not evolved past like 1965. But I've done a million road trips. I've driven one of my favorite yet scariest road trips I ever took was driving from Ohio to Houston, Texas. It was a 17-hour drive, and I drove through Alabama, I drove through Arkansas, and I've never been more scared in my entire life than when I had to pull off an exit at like 2 a.m. in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it's not because I'm saying people in Arkansas are bad. I'm sure they're beautiful people. But this particular exit, it was the only gas station, and I needed gas, and I pulled off. It was the most desolate gas station, one lamp gas station. Now, inside was totally normal. Everyone was nice, but it was terrifying getting off the highway and not knowing where you're going because it's just this one ass gas station. And in that moment, when I pulled off and pulled in to get gas, I was like, this is a horror movie. I am 100% going to get killed here because this is where you don't do. You do not do this. The reason I survived The Strangers Chapter 1 is because Ryan and Maya did not get off the exit because they needed gas. That's the emergency. That's the one example where you get off the sketchy-ass exit and bad things happen to you because you don't have a choice. You really can't go further if you don't have gas. They didn't get off for gas. They got off because they were hungry. Guess what? I'm not stopping at Venus fucking Oregon. I'm going to wait for the next McDonald's or the Taco Bell or wherever the hell else I'm going in my BMW SUV that probably gets, it's an electric car, whatever it is. They didn't need to stop there. So the reason I survived this horror film is because I've been in enough situations and enough road trips because we drive everywhere in the Midwest. We drive everywhere in the Midwest. I've driven through Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Texas. I've driven through all these places. There are certain exits and certain parts of towns where I know, you know what? I'm not going to stop here. I'm good. I'll keep going to the next fucking exit, next fucking city. So the reason I survived this, Patrick, is there is no chance in hell I'm getting off Venus, Oregon to eat at Claire's Diner or whatever the hell it's called.
I just try not to get out anywhere that rhymes with penis. So right away, I'm not going to do that anyway. But no, Damon, I've traveled the entire country, the entire world. I've been, I've been all over. So I'm not sure what California has to do with that, but I have done tons of road tripping throughout this country in particular. The only place where I was like, I need to get the fuck out of here was at a fucking diner in Port Charlotte, Florida, because they were clearly like, you ain't from around here. And like, it was like clearly clear, like, the scenes where like the guy is sitting at the bar and then he turns and everybody else at the bar is staring dead at him. Like they're not trying to pretend like they're looking at anything else. That was Port Charlotte, Florida, where they were just like, why are you in here specifically? And my friend was a complete fucking knucklehead and he could not see the forest from the trees. And I was like, we're fucking leaving right now. He's like, well, we don't need to leave here. I go, we need to fucking leave right fucking now. If you ain't fucking seen this shit, what's going on in here right now? That's the only time I was like, definitely need to get the fuck out. And I've been to a lot of sketchy parts of America and other countries too. But in the context of this movie, let's pretend, Damon, that we did run out of gas and we did end up in Venus, Oregon. I don't think I'm surviving, and I'll tell you why. Is that it's clear to me now the strangers have not just a taste for blood, they revel in it. At this point that I've bumped into the strangers, they are not afraid to kill. They know they're not hesitant to kill, and now they are actually strategizing on how to kill. And the only reason they didn't finish the job with Maya is because they heard sirens coming, so they took off. That's the only reason they took off. Not because they weren't ready to seal the deal. They were ready and done, and they could do the job, and they'd clearly done it multiple times by the time we meet them. So I think if I ran into them as best I could, they got the lay of the land. They know the ins and outs of this house. I'm not really getting away. That's not really part of their plan. If by chance the police call got through in the right amount of time, that's the only way I'm getting out. And the movie makes it clear like that. So no, I don't survive this horror movie.
And to be clear, let me rehash what I said about the California thing. I wasn't calling you like a California soy boy. I was more saying that everybody I know on the West Coast, everybody I know, they fly everywhere.
Yeah.
I have friends who live in LA and they're like, I got to fly to San Francisco. Now I know it's a big ass state. Like it's a long state, but like
huge state. Yeah.
In the Midwest, we're just like, oh yeah, if it's less than 9 hours, we'll drive it.
Yeah. But that's how I am.
But most people I know on the West Coast, like people who I know live in Vegas, they fly to LA. It's a fucking 4-hour drive. And they're like, yeah, we fly to LA. And I'm just like, why are you flying to LA?
Who are these people?
I'm not saying you're soft. I'm saying that like they don't do road trips to that extent on the West. At least my experience, people don't.
Damon, I've driven from San Diego to San Francisco in the same day. And then one time I drove from LA to San Francisco and back to LA in the same day. Yeah. I do this shit, but I'm built different, I suppose.
But you also understand the majority of people I know who live out there, they do not road trip. They're not like, oh yeah, I'm in for a 9-hour car drive typically. Midwesterners, we drive everywhere because we have to. If I want to get to Chicago, I could fly for 45 minutes or I can drive for 5 hours. I drive 5 hours. That's just what I do.
Yeah, I've never flown to Las Vegas other than when it was specifically for a job when I had to fly. That was the only difference. Like every time I've ever been to Las Vegas, I've driven.
That was my vast generalization because I'll never forget I was covering a show in Vegas and there was a show the next day in Phoenix. And my editor who I worked with at the time, not going to name names here, he was from LA. And we were in Vegas and he's like, so when do you want to catch a flight? I was like, catch a flight? We're going to Phoenix. It's like 5 hours away. And he's like, yeah, when do you want to fly out? I was like, I'm not flying out. I was like, well, rent a car and drive down. And he's like, what? I was like, we rent a car and drive down. It's Vegas to Phoenix. It's not that far. And he's like, but that's like 4 hours. I can't remember the exact time, 4 or 5 hours. He's like, we'll just fly. I was like, why are you flying? No. And I made him rent a car and drive with me from LA to Phoenix or from Las Vegas to Phoenix. I was like, I'm not flying there. It's stupid. This is such a short drive. Like, and he's like, 5 hours is so long. And I was like,
who are these people?
Yeah, that's every friend I have in LA. They're like, yeah, I got to fly to San Francisco. I got to fly to this and fly to that and fly to this. And I'm like, if it's less than 9 hours and it's not in the middle of winter when I'm going to get caught in a snowstorm, I drive there. So yeah, I'm just not used to hearing that. West Coast people I know typically like to fly everywhere. So.
The ones I know drive everywhere, but also we all grew up poor anyway. So like the idea of flying was just not in the fucking cards anyway. So that's probably why.
Yeah. Next category, and I guess last category. I'm gonna throw a curveball at you here, Patrick, with our
fair enough
last category. Is it scary? Is our actual last category? So I'm gonna throw that to you last. But let me throw you my curveball real quick. We already kind of talked about it, so I'll just very briefly here. What do we expect in The Strangers Chapter 2?
I don't know, because it's not like the setup at the end of this, like it makes us a clear through line to the next thing. The best I can guess is that in Chapter 2, the strangers are intent on finishing the job. Now in the original Strangers, they take their masks off and reveal themselves to our characters. They don't do that in this one. They keep their masks on the entire time. So it's not like she can identify them. So I don't know what it is. I think it's just a matter for them. It seems like it's just a matter of pride for the strangers. It's like, no, we need to finish our job. When we come across somebody, we're going to kill them. So I guess that's what part 2 is all about. I can't imagine how that stretches into part 3.
They said that this is basically one big film getting chopped into 3 parts, and it takes place over 5 days. Now, the mid-credits scene that we see in The Strangers Chapter 1 shows that Maya's in a hospital bed, and we see a little get well card from, we have to assume it's her friends who are in Greece or whatever. She talks to them over FaceTime during the movie, and they're over in Greece while they're traveling across country. And they're like, get better soon, we miss you or whatever. So she's had to have been in that hospital for at least a few days for there to have been a card to have gotten to her to say, we miss you, we hope you're getting better. So I assume when we pick up, it has to be, I mean, this is only 5 days. It has to be like 3 days later. So we're already at the tail end of that because no card is going to get there that quickly. Even if it's from New York, it's not going to get there that quickly to Oregon, and especially rural Oregon at that. So I agree. I think it's the whole finish the job. And my guess is they copied The Strangers to Strangers Chapter 1. I feel like it's going to be Halloween 2 to Strangers Volume Chapter 2, which is going to be her in a hospital evading her killers, and body count's going to be bigger because the strangers are going to be stalking a hospital. That's my guess. But it's weird because this is such a cool, cruel, scary, self-contained story that even when they made Strangers Pray at Night, I was kind of like, really? Like,
yeah.
I don't really need a sequel to this. Like, this feels like a pretty perfect one-act movie. Okay, we're going to get 3 chapters. Okay, I mean, I guess it's to finish the job. Like, it's all going to be about killing Maya, I guess. So, I will see. The reason I asked that question is because if I asked you where does The Strangers go after the end of Strangers, the original one, you'd be like, why? Why would you do that? Why do you need to kill it? It's terrifying the way it ends.
Yeah, you don't need. Yeah, it's a really rare. Even though it has already been sequelized, it's just a rare movie where it's like a rare horror movie where I don't need continual sequels of it. It's like it kind of ruins the premise. Like the premise is that it was so random. I mean, proof is in the pudding. Brian Bertino's favorite film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, every sequel has sucked. I mean, 2 was all right. I actually kind of like 2. But every sequel has not been good.
Well, and also because 2 felt like a completely different movie. It didn't even feel like the same movie.
Totally different, and it's still done by Tobe Hooper. But at the end of the day, it was just like the Texas Chainsaw is proof that sometimes a horror franchise doesn't need sequels. Now, I'm sure a lot of people out there are like, I actually really like 2, or I like 2 better, or I like 3 a lot, or I like the one with Matthew McConaughey that's completely batshit, or I like Texas Chainsaw 3D, like, good for you, do your thing, cuz. Like, I'm glad you like all that shit, but they don't make great sequels to the original. The original really could have just stood on its own, and I feel the same thing about The Strangers. We are going to get a chapter 2. We are going to get a chapter 3. Show me what you got. But I've been down this road, Damon, and I'm not going to keep my hopes too high.
Are you telling me that somebody actually likes Texas Chainsaw 3D?
Do your thing, cuz.
Yeah, somebody does. I don't even think Alexandra Daddario likes that movie.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like I said, again, I'm fine. It's okay. And again, maybe what we have said numerous times in the show is if they were going to make it a sequel of sorts, a reimagined sequel like Halloween 2018, just start with Chapter 2. And if they could make a version of a Chapter 2 that was interesting, then I don't even need Chapter 1. If they can pull it off, I'm in, and I'll be curious. If it's just Halloween 2 set in the Strangers universe where they're stalking Maya in a hospital, I can already tell you it's not. They're not catching me. And I also will say, if the big overarching story is there's some big giant plot about the finance guy who got killed, and then Maya and Marion, and there's some other if it's some like scheme to rob them or something. There's a reason.
Yeah, if there's a big reason.
You've taken the whole point of this entire movie away. So that's the problem, is the genius of the original was the randomness and it can happen to you. If there's a reason and now you're just putting the killers in a hospital and then maybe they're going to be in like a trailer park like they were in Pray at Night, you're just doing the same movie over and over again, just in different settings. You're just like, oh, now it's the strangers in a hospital. You're doing like Abbott and Costello meet Dracula, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. It just, this is, when I heard this was a 3-part series, my immediate reaction was like, how? Honestly, I was like, how do you do that? Like, I don't really get that. But hey, maybe they'll pull it off and I'll be blown away. Let me be clear. I'm not prejudging. I really am not. I'm just legitimately confused how they're going to do it. and make
Yeah,
it. Now I'm not curious they're going to do it. They're going to do it. They did it.
Done it.
Done. Yeah. Is it going to be good? That's the better question.
Yeah, I'm very curious because I do feel like this first one was the unnecessary one. Maybe 2 and 3 are going to get to the meat of why this is going to be such an interesting chapter in the Stranger's universe.
Sure, we'll see. We'll find out. All right, folks. That is our episode. We got lots more coming, lots of new movies coming up. When I was sitting in the theater watching The Strangers Chapter 1, there was like 19 trailers for horror films. There's a busy summer ahead. So, yeah, stay tuned for that. As always, we appreciate everyone that tunes into the show. Make sure you check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, over at our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. You'll find us over there. Please, if you do have a YouTube channel or you do have a YouTube page or whatever, you have a login, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us tremendously with the algorithm and search results and things like that. So if you do have it, even if you don't watch us on YouTube, just subscribe to the page. It really would mean a lot to us. And also, if you like us, hopefully you do. Maybe if you're a big Strangers fan, maybe not after tonight, but if you do like us, we love it when you leave reviews on Apple Podcasts and also on Spotify. We get comments on Spotify pretty regularly now, and I really appreciate that. We actually got one the other day on our Lost Boys episode, and the comment, I didn't save it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, I love how much you guys love this movie. Yes, we do. We've spent 2.5 hours filleting the Lost Boys. And that's an older episode, so thank you for folks who are discovering that now, like years after the fact. So thank you for that. So yeah, if you do like us and you want to leave us a review, we really would appreciate that, and we do appreciate that, of course. If you have comments, questions, movies you'd like us to review, hit us up anytime on email at rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or you can find us on social media. We are on Twitter /X, Facebook, and Instagram, and you can search us at Rewind of the Living Dead, and feel free to send us messages. I would say, honestly, we probably get the most messages on Instagram, but hit us up anywhere. We'd love to hear from you guys. So if you do have comments or anything, please leave us a message on those. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am everywhere at Damon Martin, and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes into the show. We will be back next week with a brand new episode of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you then.
Peace.